Welcome to Rhyme and Reason, hosted by Dr. Barry. Today, Barry welcomes founder of Grayson's Choice, Ali Kessler. And now, here's Dr. Barry Ryman.
Good afternoon. Welcome to episode number 14. Today's episode is something that I think is going to hit close to home for a number of listeners, and not necessarily because you've experienced the same thing or anything like that, but this episode, just a fair warning, it's going to run pretty deep today. It is a topic that we've never spoken about on this podcast. This podcast is usually centered in addiction, recovery, advocacy, and all that good stuff. But we wanted to switch things up a little bit because I feel like this topic and the guest that we have coming on today, Ali, is something that needs to be shared, something that needs to be out there, something that needs to be talked about, because I do believe, and Ali can expand more when she comes on, but I do believe this is something that is actually all too common. Maybe not with the dire consequences that occurred, but it does happen more times than we would care to mention. This is a serious topic. Ali is actually and has been a friend of mine since, oh my goodness, probably since around the age of 16 or 17 or 18, somewhere along those lines. We went to school together. We worked at summer camp together. We had some really good times together, and we could tell some of those stories too before we get too heavy. But so Ali had a son. His name was Grayson Kessler, who was just 4.5 years old when his own father murdered him during his court-ordered parenting time in the midst of what was a high conflict custody battle that occurred, right here in our hometown of Fort Lauderdale. She was a single mom from the very beginning. Grayson's father actually wanted nothing to do with them. I was speaking to Ali, prior to the show starting, and she had met him on a dating app in New York and wound up coming back to Florida, found out she was pregnant, and he did not want her to have the baby. He resented her for not having an abortion, literally told her multiple times that his life mission would be to make her suffer. We talk a lot on this show about mental illness. We talk about, the importance of treatment, not just from the addiction sense, but for mental health. And, there is a reason why, we have treatment for people who are struggling. And so, like I said, this is going to be a pretty heavy show. I hope you tune in and hear Ali's story and the advocacy work that she is now doing, honoring her son Grayson. And Greg, if you could bring Ali on, I'd really appreciate it. Hi, Ali.
Hi, Barry. How are you?
I'm good. And before we get too heavy, I just want to tell a few stories of our childhood. Because, right, Ali and I worked together at a summer camp that shall remain nameless. But I'm sure there's some listeners that know which camp that was. And, my history of addiction started pretty early on. And we both were counselors for, I think it was 6-year-olds.
Yeah,
at the time. And 6-year-old boys. And I'm ashamed to say this, but Ali and I would get high, on the way to camp. I remember specifically being in the cabin and literally drawing what was going to be for lunch that day, like in picture form. I wound up getting fired from that camp for giving drugs to the pool director, who her name was Sunny.
Yeah, I remember her. Yeah.
Remember her? Yeah. Everyone hated her. And so basically the story is we were playing kickball, and it was campers against counselors, and I wanted to be the hero, and I made all my counselors get on base, and I kicked a home run. And as I was rounding third base, I slipped. The clay was wet, and I literally broke my wrist. And I'm lying on the ground like in gut-wrenching pain, and all my campers are jumping on top of me because they think I'm just kidding around. And that was a good time. But I wound up in this cast, and because of a cast, I couldn't go swimming. You can't get those casts wet. And this camp director, Sunny, everyone hated her. She was like not the nicest person. She was described as just a total bitch. Now, let me tell you something. Prior to this incident, there was a big camp meeting with Nancy, the camp director, and she held all the counselors after camp, and I was kind of the kingpin of the camp, selling drugs to all the counselors. And she said, "We know there are drugs on this campus, and I will call BSO out here, and if they so as much smell a seed through one of your car doors, you all will be arrested."
That's a great accent.
It's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Barry, you're in trouble. So anyways, we had this big meeting. It didn't dawn on me that she was potentially talking about me. And so I go and break my wrist, and now I have a cast, and I can't go swimming. So I'm at the pool, my campers are in the pool, and Sunny comes and whispers in my ear. She goes, "I hear you got the Valiums. Are they the cutouts or the generics?" Like, she was talking my language at this point. And I'm like, oh, this all makes sense why everyone thinks she's a bitch. She's really a drug addict. So like a very smart high person, I proceeded to leave the pool, walk to my car, and get drugs and bring them to her. I was not the smartest. And at the end of that day, my father was sitting in the camp director's office with his arms crossed like this and his legs crossed. And our camp director, Nancy, was holding the pills in a little sample cup, shaking them. And I thought it was going to be the end of my life. So that was one summer with Ali Kessler.
Yay. I'd like to think the more happened that summer. Like we taught our kids a dance to bouncing around the room for the talent show.
Yes.
But
we did a lot of good stuff. The good news is the year prior to that, I was like most improved counselor. But anyways, I just wanted to lighten things up for a minute before we kind of get into the meat and potatoes of the show, to the heart of the matter. Ali, you have suffered, in my mind, what is an unspeakable tragedy. Okay? Like, there is not one person in this world that can say something to make you feel better from what you've gone through. And I mean that with all my heart. And you have my deepest condolences, because what you've been through, what you've endured, the trauma that's occurred because of it, what you went through even prior to Grayson's death is unspeakable. And where I'm completely and totally flabbergasted is that not one fucking person did something about it. Not one person. You're crying out for help. You're petitioning the courts. You're going in front of judges, and not one person did something about it that could have 100% prevented this unspeakable tragedy. That there is no mother in this world who loves their son that should have to endure her 4.5-year-old son being murdered by his father in a 100% preventable case. So I just wanted to say that. I want you to know, where I stand, and I think I'm speaking for a lot of people, that you are, and I told you this a couple of weeks ago, you're a really strong person. And even if you don't feel like it, these steps you have taken, that Grayson's life is not in vain, and the advocacy work that you're doing today, you are a really strong person, because there are not a lot of women, after going through what you've gone through, that would ever come back from being under the covers.
Well, I mean, in a reply to that, it's I don't really see myself as being strong. I just I don't know what else to do. My life has to go on, or it doesn't, and I have to figure out a way to do that. And I don't want Grayson's death to just be another statistic. I want it to be for something. And I want to actually shed some light on what really happened, because, people might have heard, he was murdered and whatnot, but they don't know the intricate details to the events that went down, or even the events that led up to me finding his body, which was an insane runaround for 24 hours.
Can you just take us back a little bit and first talk a little bit about Grayson, because we want to remember him for the joyful kid that he was. You've talked to me about him, multiple times, and just the light in your eyes when you speak about him. Can you talk a little bit about who he was, what his personality was like, and then the events that then transpired going after that?
Grayson was the funniest, the little cutest blonde boy with an outrageous personality, and was completely fearless. He was everyone's best friend at school and camp, and he just was smart as a whip. His preschool teacher actually told me he was kindergarten ready in preschool 3. So I already knew what I was dealing with here. And the jokes that he would tell me on a daily basis, I would just laugh, out loud, literally, with a toddler. He was very happy. His nickname is Gigs, because he was always giggling as a baby. So it stuck. And yeah, he was just the best. Joy, pure joy.
Yeah. And I've seen so many pictures you share often on your Facebook page, just memories that you've had, and it's still gut wrenching to me, and I'm witnessing this from afar. So again, I want to make it very clear that I cannot empathize with you. I can sympathize, but I cannot empathize. And I'm sure there's few people, maybe more than we think, that can empathize with you, but and hopefully you have found some support or have connected with some other women that have been through something similar as you.
I have.
Okay. Can you tell us just basically the timeline of events? I know I mentioned in your intro that you had met his father on a dating app in New York City. What went down there?
We met on a dating app, and it was nothing serious. And literally a month later, I moved away. So, I thought that would be the end of that. When I found that I was pregnant, I obviously knew it was his baby, and he just didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't want, he believed that I orchestrated everything to purposely get pregnant, or I lied about it, or just created his own little version of what his reality was, which was completely not true. And he just decided that he was going to use that animosity and resentment for the rest of his life to make me suffer. And he told me that on and over again, that he did not want to be a father with me, or maybe one day, but he didn't want to do it in this way, and he didn't want to leave Jersey or New York, and that this was just not his choice. And so he was very angry that I decided to have the baby on my own. My mom moved in with me to help me, and I literally said, I want nothing from you. I told him he can sign away his rights. And and then at 6 months old is when he sued for paternity, or he filed a paternity case, sued for 50% custody, and also wanted Grayson's last name to be changed to his, which was denied.
So he was nowhere in the picture. What did that look like the first 6 months of his life? Was he contacting you? Was he inquiring about his son?
Yeah, he knew when I had the baby somehow. I'm not even quite sure how. And then he came down. He flew down to meet him when Grayson was about a month old, and unbeknownst to me, he actually swabbed his cheek with a DNA test from the drugstore, and flew back home. And then, of course, saw the results that he was the father. And then he actually moved to Florida a couple months after that. And then we tried to do things organically. And, I had him visit with Gray daily. I said, you can come by whenever you want. And then just out of the blue, he just, I just got served with papers at 6 months.
Okay. And so at that point, I'm assuming was the custody granted at that point at the 6-month mark?
Well, it took a little bit of a time, but we did like a mediation in which we agreed to a step up plan, which, first he did like, 1 or 2 overnights, and then gradually stepped up to 50%. So when Gray was 3 is when it went 50-50.
Okay. And at this point, or even prior to this point, were there like tons of red flags for you? I'm assuming you didn't know his dad too well, based off the short time you spent with him in New York. What kind of red flags were you seeing at that point?
Well, I mean, all during my pregnancy, I would get really hateful texts, obviously, that he didn't want the baby, but that, just texts that really, berated me and my character, which I didn't even think anything of at the time. I was just like, he's angry. But then he started talking about how he was in a cult and how he suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder for years after that and was in like intense therapy. And just, and then when he moved here, things just weren't normal with him. Like he just didn't act like a normal human being would. He would literally send me 500 texts in one day of harassment, saying, what a horrible person I am, and how could I do this to a child and bring them into this world in this manner, and every other kid has it better, and just.
Was this prior to him having custody? Was this in the time?
I mean, it started, like I said, when I was pregnant. I mean,
okay.
Yeah. So it was just over and over. And then, as the years went by, very bizarre things happened where I tried to get help for, including, he showed up at my house on New Year's Day, I think like 2019, to pick up Gray when it wasn't his night. And he's just demanded that we start the 50-50. And he honked his horn all morning for hours outside the door until he called the police on himself. And then, of course, the police came, and my poor son was like upstairs looking out the window saying, why is daddy, whatever, honking, and why is the police here? And of course, I showed the officers our agreement, which showed that it was not his day. And he literally just acted bonkers. One day he was starting school at Nova, and he didn't, I guess the regular start date was a Monday, but Grayson was starting only 3 days a week. So his start day was Tuesday. And he literally said that he was taking Gray to school on Monday. And I had to call the principal, his teachers, and be like, if he shows up to school, please tell him that he's not enrolled until Tuesday. I mean, it was just insane, the things that I had to go through. He wouldn't pay for school. He wouldn't pay for camp. He told me to research some preschools. I sent a spreadsheet of 11 schools that I visited with pros and cons and costs. And he literally said no to all of them. So at this point, I mean, just everything was an argument, and nothing was easy. He took every joy that I had of being a mom and just tainted it with poison from the get-go.
That's unreal. Talk a little bit about what this cult was. You mentioned that his dad was in a cult.
Yeah, I don't know too much about it. It's called the Moonies. I know it was like a mass wedding was involved at some point, and yeah, I don't know too much about it. I just know that, I guess he suffered like brainwashing, or just like he said, he admitted to post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm not sure, but he always said that he had trouble trusting people ever since then. So that's why he didn't trust me.
Okay. All right. So take us a little bit deeper now. I'm assuming more and more things started occurring
Yeah.
where you started to actually petition the courts. What was going on there?
So after a couple of those things that I just mentioned, I said, and not only that, but he also worked a lot out of town, and he just couldn't. The time sharing agreement of 50-50 was just not working. He was picking up Grayson at 7 p.m. on like a Wednesday night. Grayson would fall asleep in the car on the way there, and then he'd bring him back to me at 8 a.m. because he worked. So I was like, literally, you're doing this just for him, not Grayson, because Grayson's sleeping the entire time. I tried to petition for a psych eval after the whole ordeal, honking the horn and taking him to school on off days and just weird things. And somebody just dropped the ball there. I don't know where it went. It was filed, and then I never heard anything since. And then there were some times where we were not cordial, but like it was the ebbs and flows of rage, I guess. And maybe a few months went by where we were just okay. And then towards the end, I'd say probably starting in like January of 2021, he just started getting very possessive of me. And I guess he found that I was dating someone, and he just started acting, very erratic again. He actually, there was a tracker found on my car, but I knew this because he would often text me things that he shouldn't know about my whereabouts or Grayson's, that I found bizarre. And so I, told all my friends or my lawyer, I'm like, I think I'm being followed. I don't understand how he would know something like this. And, and then, people are like, well, you should check for a tracker, and I'll get into that. But it just very odd behavior, and the text just kept coming and coming. And then he started texting my friends. He started making fake social media accounts to cyber stalk me, because obviously he was blocked on all of mine. He had his friends reach out to my boyfriend. He just very odd behaviors. And he would just never talk to me directly. It was always through text. We also had an agreement through the courts that he wasn't even allowed to text me. We were supposed to use an app called Talking Parents, which he never did. Or he would actually text me and then copy and paste it in Talking Parents.
Now, at this point, did he have custody of Grayson?
Yeah. He had 50% when Gray turned 3.
So you would just drop off, or he would pick up, or you'd meet at a neutral site, or how did that work?
Yeah. In the beginning, I drop him off, or he would pick him up depending upon whose day it is. But once Grayson was in school, I picked him up from school every day because John had to work. So even on his days, I had Gray. I was his nanny. And then he would come pick him up from our home.
Okay. And were there any indications of any type of like violent tendencies with him? Did he get abusive at all with Grayson, or physically abusive with you, or?
No, that's like, he's very, very quite opposite characteristics almost. He was like the computer type, very, proper, and just thought I was just this horrible person. And he wasn't like a violent type. I mean, obviously I don't know what went on when I wasn't there. But yeah, I mean, I obviously knew that he had mental issues, which I have, addressed with him. But did I know he was going to be violent and murder his child? No. Now, towards the end of everything, the text started getting really, really crazy. He sent me one that said, I want to see your head separated from your body, but I'm not the violent type. God will take care of that. At that point, I started to really get nervous. Every single text from like day one, I screenshotted and sent to my lawyer, like everything. So everything was documented. I even had a spreadsheet with everything in it. And so my lawyer, she was working on a stalking injunction at that time. And, I didn't know if I should go to the police or what have you, but I just knew that it just wasn't normal. And then literally like that same night I got another text saying, I think we should get married. We should take Grayson to Hawaii. I'm in love with you. All this stuff. There's a fine line between love and hate, and just bizarre texts. I mean, out of nowhere, you get like death threats, and then you get ones that say, I want to buy you a ring. And
sounds like he was completely bipolar.
Well, that's what I've told him over the years. I said, I think you're bipolar. I've 100% said that. It's just, and he's never said anything to me over the years that he wanted to even try to have a relationship or be a family or anything of the sort, which was never really even on the table. And we never were. So it was just very bizarre. And I don't know, if he was just getting jealous, or I think the bottom line is he saw that I was actually happy for the first time. I had everything with Gray was great. He was in a good school. I had a boyfriend. I was moving on. And I think that really fueled his fire.
How did you realize, you said you were going to bring up the whole tracking thing? What did that look like?
Yeah. So like I said, I told everyone, I'm like, I think there's a tracker in my car. I even once tried to look for it myself, but I read that you really need to like get under the car. So I actually went to a body shop on my house, and I, went in and I said, hey, I know this is going to sound really strange, but is there any way you could just put my car in a lift and look for a tracker? And first the guy said, no, I'm sorry, we're really busy. So I wouldn't take no for an answer. I drove around back, and I just drove up to a mechanic, and I said, hey, I know you're super busy. This will only take like 5 minutes, but I'm in a situation and I really need my car put on a lift. Can you look for the tracker? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Within 2 minutes, he came out with a black box, and he was like, you're right. It was right under the passenger side seat on, underneath the car. At that point, I brought it right to the Plantation Police Department, filed a report. Obviously it's illegal. And unbeknownst to me, Grayson was already dead.
Oh, is that was
the same day.
Oh my
God. I didn't know he was dead because we didn't find him till the next day.
All right. So let's lead up to that terrible day, if you don't mind talking about it. But I know there was a lot of events that transpired in those last few days, with you going to the courthouse and obviously to the police department. Can you talk a little bit about what happened?
So we were working on getting the stalking injunction. I actually took it down to the courthouse myself on May 20th, 2021. And when I was filling out the forms, the clerk said, what's going on? And I explained a little bit, and he suggested that I actually, instead making a stalking injunction, make it a domestic violence injunction so I can get protection for Gray as well as myself.
Mm-hmm.
The stalking injunction would have protected me, but not Gray. So I said, okay, great. So I sat there for about 2 hours, rewrote everything handwritten. I had with me about 250 pages worth of PDFs of evidence, and the text messages that I was getting, and all of the erratic behavior. I wrote in big letters, I fear for my life, my boyfriend's life, but most of all, my son's life. And they told me to come back at 6 p.m. For the results. So at that point, John was picking up Gray at 5:30, and I either kept him and disobeyed our mediation or agreement, or our binding agreement, or the clerk of the court said, if it's approved, I can get police escort to go pick up Gray that night. And I said, okay. So I figured I'll send him with his father, and then I'll go get him with a policeman. Well, he tracked me to the courthouse because there was a tracker on my car. And he called me that same night and it was like, hey, and because he lived right by the courthouse. And he's like, hey, what are you doing down here? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, oh, I saw your car. And I'm like, you saw my car? I'm like, okay. And, I made up some story. And then went home. And then the rest of the evening, I was getting bombarded by texts saying, why were you at the courthouse? Are you getting a restraining order? If for text messages, why would you do that to your child over text messages? And just saying, what a horrible mother I am to put her son in this world and bring him into this kind of environment. And and if I am getting a restraining order, then I can just come pick him up from his house. Well, the injunction was denied. I went back there. First of all, I buckled Grayson in at 5:30 p.m. as I always did. I gave him a kiss. I said, I'll see you tomorrow, because I picked him up from school every day. And I told him I was going to pull my string, because that was what we did when we were separated. And that was the last time I ever saw him. And then I went back to the courthouse. They told me my injunction petition was denied. They said I didn't have enough evidence to support it. They said, and if any harm was made, the harm was made to me, and they didn't see any evidence of Grayson being harmed. So that was that. The next day, I got more texts from John early in the morning saying that he was going to keep Grayson home from school, that he was feeling under the weather, and that if I had a restraining order, that I should come pick up Gray. So I just thought, he's just nuts. Like, if he wants to take a day off of work and hang out with Gray at home and keep him home from school, fine. Little did he know the injunction was denied. And I will preface to say that I never texted him back. From the very beginning, when you're dealing with narcissist behavior, which is what he was here and I was here at all times. The only thing that you can do is ignore, because once you start responding, you're adding to the fire. So I never replied, and that was just what I did, unless it was specific about Grayson, like if a pickup time or logistics. I didn't text him. So he started texting me that morning that he was going to keep him home, and I was like, all right, if he wants to miss work and keep him home, fine. I didn't think anything of it. That afternoon is when I just was like, how the heck did he know I was at the courthouse? So I just knew there was a tracker in my car. And that is when I brought it into the Firestones on my house and found the tracker, filed the police report, and then,
what did the police say when you brought the evidence of the tracker?
Well, they said it was illegal. I also showed them the text that said, I want to see your head separated from your body. So they submitted all of that. They said that, they would be filing a claim and that I should hear from them shortly, and so on and so forth. But it's a process. So the following day, which was that Friday, now mind you, I had called his teacher at Nova that Thursday that he wasn't there. And I said, can you let me know if Gray is in school? She said, he is not. And I said, was he called in sick? Like, did his father call or just didn't bring him? She said, nobody called. I said, please let me know if he's in school tomorrow. So the next morning, I went down to his Fort Lauderdale condo, which was a gated community that I couldn't get into. The security guards who knew me, saw me every day, would not let me in. I had police come and escort me to go pick up Grayson, because at this point, it was my day now for time sharing. And I called his teacher just to confirm that he was not in school, and nor was he called in. So at this point, Gray, I hadn't seen or heard from Gray since Wednesday. It was Friday now, and he's been missing from school for 2 days with no with no calls. The police knocked on on John's door. They said there's no answer. I said, okay, well, he's missing. All sorts of things were running through my mind, like he kidnapped him and took him back to Jersey. I thought maybe they just went to like a hotel and he's just, making me suffer. I don't even know. The police looked at my time sharing agreement. They said, even if we found him and he doesn't want to give him to you, you can't even get him without an emergency pickup order. So we filed for an emergency pickup order, which was denied. Why it was denied again.
Wait a minute. So hold on. So you're standing at his door of his condo, and the police will not break the door down or anything. And now you have to leave there to go back to a courthouse to file an emergency pickup order?
Yeah. So they said that, well, Grayson's with his father. Why is there reason for concern? I showed him the text. I said, well, this is, it's really hard to explain in, 5 minutes, like 5 years of history. But, when there's red flags, there's red flags. And all I needed was that injunction to be approved the day before for a judge to just err in the side of caution, say, let's grant that. And then, we'll reconvene in front of the judge in like 3 days. And, I can discuss all the evidence. Anyway, so the police couldn't help me. I had to get emergency pickup order. I found out that was denied. If we had found him, it would have, it could have helped, but we didn't even get that far. So at that point, I was just frantically calling everyone. I called his mother in New Jersey. I called his sisters in New Jersey. Nobody has heard from him. They were completely shocked about any of this. Like, they didn't even know we had any bad blood between us, which only, proves my point of that John created his own, altered state of reality is what I call it. He just had his own, I called it, he lived in La La Land, and it wasn't, everything that he would say was so far from the truth, but he believed it to be true, which is even more insane. So I'm making calls. I called Child Protective Services. I called Broward Sheriff's Office. I called the police about 5 or 6 times to get wellness checks, in which they just knocked on the door. They said nobody answered. I got in touch with a friend of Grayson's in the building, their parents, and then I asked them if they could see if John's car was in the driveway or in the parking garage, and they said it was. I said, can you see if the car seat is in there? I thought maybe if he Ubered, he would have taken the car seat. They said the car seat was there. So at this point, I'm just like, I don't know what to do. Now we're
freaking out.
The end of the day. I'm freaking out. It's the end of the day, and the police literally called me. Child Protective Services said we cannot send one more police officer there until the next day. We just don't have the manpower. And I'm like, this is just nuts. Like, this is just nuts. They're like, we don't think he. And during this time, his sisters were also calling the police here in Florida from Jersey, saying we believe their brother and Grayson are trapped in the apartment, and that John may have killed himself, and that Grayson is stranded. And even with that call, they wouldn't help. At this point, I was just racking my brain thinking like what I can do here. I just couldn't just not do anything. Someone said, well, why don't you get a locksmith? And I said, okay, well, would a locksmith just break down a door that I don't even have access to? So somehow I figured out who was the owner of the condo. They actually lived in Jersey as well. I got their number via the internet, and they said that somebody had a spare key but was in Miami, and that it took a few hours. And I said, well, would you agree to get a locksmith? I explained the situation, and they did. So I found a locksmith. This was like 10 o'clock at night. Fort Lauderdale police agreed to meet the locksmith at the door. And they got, FaceTime permission from the owners in Jersey. 11:50 p.m., I got a text from the neighbor saying the locksmith and the police officer are at John's door. So I'm sitting there waiting, expecting to hear.
Where are you?
I'm
You're
at
home?
home. I was told to stay at home.
Okay.
I started to drive down there, and then I was literally told to stay at home. So I was expecting them to be like, no, nobody's in there. And then, just at least I would know that there was nobody in there. So 10 minutes go by, nothing. Half an hour goes by, nothing. 2 hours go by, nothing. Now I'm texting the neighbor saying, what's going on? What's going on? No reply. 5 a.m., I get a knock on my door. At this point, I'm in a ball in my closet. Sorry.
It's okay.
I couldn't accept the fact of what they could have been telling me, or why were they at my door.
Was it the police?
It was the police, the crime scene investigation team, everyone. It just took them 5 hours to tell me this. And they told me that they were able to open the door, and that Grayson and John were both found dead on the couch, and that they believe that it happened the day before, Thursday. And that was the day I died. And I just, the hoops that I had to go through to find that is what really kills me, because nobody had any accountability at all. Police officers, nobody could help me. They said, no, these things are not in place. Like, they're like, well, he's with his father. And I'm like, well, then laws need to change if this is the case. And I'm asking for help and not getting it because they were afraid of losing their job or getting sued. I'm not even sure. At this point, I got news that my stalking injunction was approved, and that the courts did actually deem John to be a threat to me. But my son should be okay. So if it had gone through, we would have had to do our drop-offs at the police station. So to me, I always use this analogy. I'm like, so you're saying if Hitler had a child, he would have been a good parent. Even though he slaughtered the Jews, he was good to the child. It just makes no sense. They saw him as a danger to me. He should not be in control of a 4-year-old. Any human being that is hurting another human being, let alone that child's mother or father, this could go both ways, is not in their right mind and is not fit to have full custody. Or I'm sorry, to have unsupervised custody.
This is such a broken system.
It is very broken, and you can't even imagine all of the things, like I was telling you earlier, people contact me daily, mothers, people, grandmothers of their daughters going through similar things. So many people are living, through the hell of family court because of these laws are not in place that will actually put the child's safety first in lieu of like parental rights. I never once kept Grayson from John, ever, because I didn't want to break our contract, and I didn't want to create animosity with Gray, and I wanted everything to just be copacetic. I tried to do every step the correct way through the the laws and through the proper channels, and in the end, literally nobody could help me. Nobody.
Can you let's shift gears a little bit. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the show, what you have gone through and continue to go through for that matter is, and I hate to use these words again, but it is an unspeakable tragedy. Okay. And like I mentioned earlier, this was, and displayed by the story you just told, 100% preventable.
It was. And it should have been.
If certain laws were in place, if people would have listened, if you didn't have to cut through so much red tape, if you would have just been heard.
If judges had proper training on domestic violence, because that's the thing. The judge that denied my injunction, it wasn't even my judge that has been involved in the picture the whole time. It's like whoever's on duty is like, oh, well, they don't know you, but Here you go, denied. How about we just, take someone's word for it when you're dealing with a toddler, a school-age kid that, can't really speak on their behalf, and just maybe have expedited hearings till the next day, just until that person can get heard. Because I'm sure if I went in front of a judge and I would have submitted all the evidence, it would have been approved.
100%.
But there is no training, there is no laws in place that would have made the police help me. And that is why I am working with local senators and legislators on getting Grayson's Law passed.
Okay, so on that note, can you talk a little bit about what Grayson's Law is? And I know I told you off air, Ali, that Grayson did not die in vain. That you are and continue. You're like a crusader who is going to save lives. That's what it all comes down to. Okay, you're going to save innocent children from the tragedy that you've gone through. If this law can get put into place, can you talk about what is Grayson's Law? Talk about the link we have up right now, graysonschoice.org,
Sure.
and all the advocacy stuff you're doing now.
So in a nutshell, Grayson's Law would be actually putting the child safety first. Twofold here. One would be introducing the term coercive control, which is a term not many people know of, but it's the type of abuse, emotional abuse that I went through, including gaslighting, including manipulation, including, not following the orders, not paying for things, and just being, all around abusive verbally.
Mm-hmm.
The courts don't see that unless you have physical scars. They don't see that type of abuse as being abuse. So we want to expand the definition for domestic violence to include coercive control, because it is very much present in our system, and it really needs to be heard. I mean, I will say that a bill was just signed federally by Biden. Angelina Jolie actually just took it up to Washington to sign Caden's Law, which is a very similar case about a little girl that was murdered by her father a few years back. So it was approved and signed federally, which means we can get state funding. But yeah, coercive control is a thing. So, and the other part would be that if one parent is harming the other parent, that is grounds for a judge to remove the child from the abuser. Right now, that is not in place. Like I said, they said, well, the abuse is to me, but Grayson should be okay. But in my eyes, like I just said, if a human being is hurting or harming another human being, something is wrong with that person.
Yeah, that whole train of thought is asinine. Okay,
it is. And just the fact the stalking injunction was approved the next day is just mind-boggling.
For his dad to be sending you text messages that he wants to see your head separated from your body. There's a tracking device on your car, honking in front of your house for hours on end. Obviously, completely and totally emotionally unstable. Okay, there is no person in their right mind that can take their own life and their child's life at the same time. Okay, I understand suicide. That happens. Right. Okay, that's not for me to judge.
And that's the thing here. He could have just killed himself.
Right, just kill yourself.
It would have been said, but at least his horrible life that he says that I ruined would be over. But this wasn't about him. This is about making me suffer. Yep. And this is the only way that he could really do it. This is the only way that he could do it.
Yeah. And just the completely and totally selfish. I mean,
it's a psychopath. He is a murderer. He is a murderer just like any other famous murderer. I mean, psychopath.
Psychopath. Okay, so tell me more about Grayson's Choice. What's going on with that?
So I started graysonschoice.org as a way just to sort of tell our story and then have information about, different programs that, I hope to create over the next few years. We've already had a few fundraisers, including Grayson's 1-year memorial that just passed, where we had many speakers on speaking on behalf of domestic violence, family court, coercive control. We had a therapist talk about what red flags look like in that type of abuse. And I also, down the road, like I said, about training for judges, I think it's so important that not only judges, but lawyers as well, get the training they need to see what this type of abuse, because it's different than, like I said, it's different than a knife cut. It's different. No one really knows what it is. But when there's a pattern and these red flags happen over a period of time, that's when you should go ding, ding, ding. This isn't regular, someone that's just mad. This is a vengeance.
Is there anyone in the system right now that is being held accountable for all of these series of events and missed opportunities to save a 4.5-year-old's life? Is there anyone that is being held accountable? Is there any retribution to be had off of what has occurred?
There is no accountability whatsoever. The judges have immunity and their decision is their decision. The police, obviously, they say, well, the laws are not in place, that they could have helped me. Do I think that they should have anyway? Absolutely. Like I said, especially when you're dealing with a child. No, there is no accountability. No one has stepped up and said, this, that, or
so not one person is taking responsibility for all these missed opportunities.
No, not even my lawyer.
That is that's mind-boggling.
Yep.
I mean,
so now my child is dead and their lives just go on like nothing happened, and mine is crumbled.
Yeah, I mean, this is not something you just get over. Okay. And from a doctor of psychology standpoint here, okay, this is and will have and will always forever affect you. Okay. There are tons of different traumas that people endure in a lifetime, some mild, some moderate, some really fucking heavy duty stuff that occurs. Yeah. And from what I said earlier is, the courage that you have displayed to not hide, to come out, to talk about it, to be courageous, to show your emotion, to hopefully, and I think your goal, and you could tell me if I'm wrong, but your goal is to prevent something like this ever happening to someone else ever again. And I know that's not a reality, because the system is still broken, the system is still flawed.
Yes.
But what you're doing right now will, if it hasn't already, will have an impact on similar situations going forward for these women, or men, right?
Right.
This could go the other way too. I don't want to.
Yeah, this is not a gender. This is not mothers against fathers.
It's not gender specific.
No,
correct.
It just statistically, it just happens to be more that fathers do the murdering, but it can go both ways.
Yes. So I do think that, the work you're doing right now, and I know you had met with my good friend and somebody we had on here a couple of weeks ago, our state representative, Michael Gottlieb.
Yes.
You have a ton of support right now from the political side, getting your voice out there. Going forward now, kind of what are the next steps? Do you have a lot more hoops to jump through for this law to be approved, or what does that look like?
The law was introduced last December, and it was introduced in the Senate in January. I went to Tallahassee. I spoke. It passed one committee, and then it died. No other committee would listen, and the House didn't even. They were busy with their bills. we got some feedback. So as of right now, we're going to make some changes to the verbiage of Grayson's Law, and sort of tweak it a little bit. So, when it gets filed again this fall, and we go back to Tallahassee in January, it's fail proof, and hopefully it flies through House and Senate. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. I know other states have Caden's Law, Jennifer's Law. Those all took about 5 years. I will say that, hopefully with those laws already happening and created, that this could go faster and smoother. But I have to say that Florida is just backwards. We don't follow the same suit as other states do, and it's going to be harder, which I don't understand, because ultimately this is about children's safety, and somehow it gets convoluted into a million other things.
Is that a result of our governor? I'm not a big political person. I don't know the ins and outs of bills and things passing and state
a lot of
stuff.
it has to do with fathers' rights, and that they're worried about that people would abuse the system, and mothers would, oftentimes they describe mothers as being like vindictive, or they're saying this happened when it didn't, just to get back at someone. But like I said, all I needed was a hearing and I would have talked to the judge. So it's not like I was asking for a total, review. Yeah, they just don't believe us.
And I'm a 1,000,000% sure that you have spent a lot of your days with the shoulda, coulda, woulda, what if, right? And I know
I still do every day.
I'm sure.
I'm like, what if I just texted him back? What if I just kept him home that night? What if I did that? Yes, every day.
Yeah. So and that is beyond natural for any human being that has any type of emotion. How do you, and we're getting, pretty close to the end of the show. How do you go on every day now? Right. And I know your life is forever changed. But you have made a decision to go on with life. Okay. I see you out there. I see you with your boyfriend. I see you traveling, which is awesome, because these are the things you must do, right? How do you wake up every day?
We call them little joys, things that I have to look forward to. Look, I said I had two choices. I either stay in bed all day and die, or I get up, because ultimately my rent still needs to be paid. My bills still have to pay. I'm not married. And, the day that Grayson died, I say, I died too, but also my life as I knew it died. I'm no longer a mother. I no longer run in those circles. I lost friends because I'm not in those circles. I lost literally my life as I knew it. And I have to start over. And yeah, and I'm 45. I mean, the chances of having another child is slim. And he took that from me. So all I can do now is, get up, try to make a difference, try to have these little joys. And luckily I do have amazing friends and family, and my boyfriend has been like a gift from God, because he has been so supportive, and I'm sure this is not easy for him either. And I told him from the beginning that he should run, but he hasn't.
Listen, like I've said at the beginning of the show, I have known you for almost 30 years, and you have always been a very caring, kind, and giving person, and that's your nature. I don't know why these things happen. I'm not God. I don't think there's any justification to even try to dream up a reason why something like this would have happened. But the only thing you can do from this day forward is exactly what you've been doing. You wake up, you get out of bed, you put your 2 feet on the ground, and you try to be the best person you could be every day, and try to help someone else.
And some days I do stay in bed. I have to say, there are some days where I just don't want to see the day.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Says a Facebook user, you will always be a mother. Although Grayson isn't here, you're still his mom always. And, that's a really important point, that you were an amazing mother, and you gave him 4.5 amazing years. And I know that's no consolation for your grieving process and what you're going through now. But do you want to leave us with any last thoughts? Anything that you feel the audience should hear? Anything other people who are tuning in can do to support your efforts?
I mean, the support that we need right now is to help get the awareness for Grayson's Law when it comes back around this fall. As much support as needed, so that way the senators and the House reps listen and really understand why this is so important. Because again, it's not just me. We're not just one runoff event. I mean, these types of cases are happening at an alarming rate, not only in Florida, but all over the world. I mean, it's just insane, the stories that I hear on a daily basis. So people can go to graysonschoice.org. They can help donate to help fund these advocacy issues that I've been, pretty much spending all my days and nights doing. And yeah, just create awareness and support. And most of all, just keep talking about Gray and keep looking at his Facebook page and just remembering him and keeping him alive.
Ali, I love you. You are an amazing soul. A lot of people have messaged me today and yesterday, excited to, see you again and hear your story and be there for you in a supportive way. So thank you so much for joining Rhyme and Reason. This has been, a fish out of water moment for me. Because I'm usually on here talking about what I do best, which is, discussing addiction, recovery, and all that stuff. But this is what I feel and what you have shared is something that these listeners need to hear. So I will keep you.
And I thank you.
I'll keep you in my prayers. And thank you so much for joining the show and being courageous and talking about your story.
Anytime. I will never refuse.
Thank you.